Okay, everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. A few notes about the program. We're going to be hearing from Foundation President and CEO Cecilia Clarke and VP of Programs and Partnerships Marcella Tillett about the conception of the BK COVID-19 Response Fund, the funding approach, and how donors' contributions are fueling vital efforts across the borough. A quick note, if you're a grant seeker and you have questions, please send those to covid19@brooklyncommunityfoundation.org and they'll be answered by our programs team. For those of you who are joining by video, you'll see a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. As questions come to you, please feel free to type them in. After Cecilia and Marcella discuss our response fund, we'll try to answer as many questions as possible. And with that, I will now hand it over to Cecilia Clarke.
Sorry.
Hi, Cecilia.
Hi, Marcella. Hi, everyone. It's Cecilia Clarke from the foundation. So delighted to have you join us today. First, I just want to say that I hope that you are all as well and safe as you can be, maybe even happy. I hope there's a part of your life right now that is giving you some joy. I want to just give you a brief overview of how we created this fund, and then Marcella will be able to give you far more details about what the work really looks like and what's really happening on the ground. So by way of background, for those of you who may be completely unfamiliar with the foundation, we are celebrating our 10th anniversary this year. We were originally a bank foundation and we converted to Brooklyn's Community Foundation in 2009. We've actually have experience with emergency funding. We were also the go-to fund established around Superstorm Sandy, which, as probably many of you know, deeply impacted Brooklyn and especially many of our most vulnerable neighbors. We anticipate that the exact same thing will happen here. As I'm sure you've all read in the news, Kings County now has more COVID cases than any county in the nation. And with a very vulnerable population, high immigrant population, large African-American population, very low resource population in many parts of this borough, that means that this crisis is going to hit especially hard. So in many ways, as the borough's community foundation, we feel a profound sense of duty and obligation. And to that end, we got started very quickly. I guess now it's been 2 weeks. We were actually among the very first community foundation in the country, I think after Seattle, for obvious reasons, to actually get a fund launched. And it took 2 full days of full staff working on it to figure out how we could maximize resources for our community and how we could most fairly and equitably get those resources back out as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So Marcella will delve into this more deeply, but I want you all to be aware that one of the things that we as a whole staff felt was critically important was that a crisis is no time to abandon your values. And I think one of the things that is really consistent about our work is that we have a very strong racial justice lens with a borough that's almost 70% people of color, and where those resources are indeed distributed along racial lines. This is something that's critically important to us and helps guide our work. And in addition, we tend to fund smaller and medium-sized nonprofits because we feel those are the ones who tend to be left out of larger philanthropic resources and really just can't compete trying to find larger capital. So that is the way we give. And another way we give is through general operating support, which is essentially as flexible as possible. And that kind of practice is showing up now today with this fund. I'm very pleased to announce that we've raised over $800,000 and that represents about 250 donors. I don't know the average size gift, but I can tell you that a significant majority of these donors have never given to us before. And I think what's important about that is that it shows that this community is really rallying And I really do believe, as president of this foundation and as a resident of Brooklyn, that we can do this, that Brooklyn neighbors really, really are going to help each other. So of course I have to ask all of you to please tell as many people as you know about this fund and about how important it is that we continue to provide resources to those who are really working hard on the ground. So there will be time for Q&A, and we'll welcome any and all questions, but I do want to turn it over to Marcella so she can give some more details.
Sure. Thank you, Cecilia. So as mentioned, we launched our fund on March 13th. And even though this is a response fund, we are providing more than funding. We are providing more than grant making. We really see the response needing to be multiple approaches. So we take the approach of grant making, we take the approach of capacity building to nonprofits, and we take the approach of advocacy. And we have kind of started off moving in all three directions all at once with our amazing team at the foundation. But I'm going to focus first on what the grant making has looked like. We at Brooklyn Community Foundation center the community voice, the community expertise in how we develop programs, how we develop requests for proposals, how we develop how we're going to give and what is going to be supported in terms of solutions to a lot of the challenges we see in communities throughout Brooklyn. And we did not want to abandon that even though we were moving at an urgent speed. So very early on in the process, earlier this month, we started reaching out to our nonprofit community partners to ask them, what are they seeing in their communities? We reached out to our community leaders in the Asian American and Asian immigrant community because we knew early on that discrimination and that xenophobia was hitting hard. Before the pandemic showed up in diagnoses, it showed up in discrimination, and we wanted to be positioned to respond to that. So we reached out to those community partners to hear what was the experience at that stage. We reached out to our community partners that serve elders because we knew that was going to be a vulnerable population based on public health information that was available at the time. And there was concern about vulnerabilities there. There was concern about the economic impact on workers that may be impacted if we went the way of Italy and Spain, which we have. So very early on, we crafted the fund to respond to those priority immediate needs. And as we've launched and begun awarding grants, we've seen community groups show up with those requests, and really in innovative, really smart ways. These are community groups that are connected to the communities of people and the geographic communities they serve, and best positioned to really address the day-to-day needs that are shifting as this dynamic pandemic continues to unfold. So in terms of the grant making, we've been really excited to see how our community partners have been responding. Right now, the focus areas are anti-stigma efforts to support and address the xenophobic and anti-Asian harassment and discrimination, prevention measures that support vulnerable populations of people, such as older adults, people with compromised immune systems, people who are unhoused, undocumented immigrants. We are looking to support organizations who are meeting the practical needs that have emerged for vulnerable populations, such as meal delivery and daily living support for people who are homebound, food access and other material supports for workers and workers who have lost wages, or workers who have also been impacted and aren't going to be readily supported by any kind of structural response that the government unrolls, which is coming, but we know, as with anything, there are going to be people in communities that fall through the gaps, and we want to make sure that they're not forgotten and left out when we talk about what a response in Brooklyn needs to look like. So the support for workers who have lack of access to the things that they need is also another priority area. And we also know that as this evolves, there are going to be needs that emerge that we hear about from our community partners that maybe weren't present last week. So for example, something that's emerging through the application process that we're noticing is a glaring need for support for people who have experienced or at increased risk for gender-based and intimate partner violence. We are talking about a situation where we are being forced to have this physical distance, and we are in close spaces, and data shows and the experts show that that can cause and lead to or correlates with an increase in intimate partner violence and gender-based violence. So our community partners are best positioned to intervene and provide support to keep people safe. So that's kind of how the fund has taken shape over the past week and a half. It feels like it's been several weeks, but we've been working hard to get the word out, working with our community partners to just really listen to what the needs are and push resources out as much as possible, and working closely with our philanthropic partners to make sure that there's some coordination in the response from the sector.
Marcella, can you tell everyone roughly how many applications have you received just in the past week, I guess? Well, 2 weeks almost?
Yeah, I want to say we've received at least 50 applications. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really important to note, because even though we are very mindful of how we ask for information to inform the design of the fund and how we ask for information to assess applications, because we want to make sure that we are not adding any burden to our nonprofit partners. They are stretched to and beyond capacity, and we know that, and we want to show up in a way that is helpful and not burdensome. So we have for our current and most recent grantees, an application that is 2 questions. And then for organizations we don't have any relationship with and we really don't know well yet, we ask a few more additional questions. And even though that is a very streamlined process, it's still an additional step that all organizations have not been able to make in the past week and a half. So we've received 50 applications, at least, maybe a little bit more over the past week and a half. And we know more are coming, more are rolling in every day. We are doing reviews every week, well, every day. And then we're doing recommendation review for approval every Thursday. So 3 o'clock, I'll see you for the review. But we know that this need is immediate. And so we want to streamline our processes as much as possible so that they can focus on the work.
I just want to emphasize to those listening that, the behind the scene workings of philanthropy are kind of mysterious, often mysterious. But I want to emphasize that it is extraordinary to have an application for funding that has 2 questions. And they're 2 short questions, by the way. They're about 100 words each, maybe. I mean, I've seen the form, it's teeny. And so we really are trying to reduce every burden possible for our grantees. In addition, Marcella and her team have done a lot of other things that aren't even just crash grants. For example, we suspended all reporting across the board. So anybody right now who is getting funding from us is released of reporting requirements, because we understand fully, of course, that they are going to be deeply focused not only on serving their community, but also desperately trying to find some funds to keep them sustained. And in addition to the COVID fund, we have lots of other nonprofits that are doing phenomenal work, again, for highly vulnerable populations. So we are also using funds to try to, well, what Marcella and I have coined as a bump. It's not a very elegant word, but it's the best we could come up with, which is essentially saying, not only are we going to give you the grant we intended to give you this year, we're going to give you a little more. Because in fact, these are the times that we should step up and not step back. So there are a lot of things that we really are trying to look at the macro level of how are all the ways that as Brooklyn's Community Foundation, we can help our partners.
Yeah, can I say a little bit more about that bump? Because I think it's just so, I think it's just so important because, again, in times of emergency, I think it might be tempting to shift focus and just focus on that emergency. And yes, we need to do that. We also have to continue to address the needs that were there before COVID-19. are being exacerbated during and will be either in a remaining state or in a worsened state after. This is not the time to pull back. So when we look to supporting our current community partners, it's really a testament to our belief in their work and the critical service they provide to communities throughout Brooklyn. And, you know, we already center racial justice and social justice in our giving. And with the bump, we are still applying an additional equity filter to make sure that we're looking at our organizations who are the smaller organizations who may not be as connected to networks of wealth, or they may not have as developed a board or donor network, and giving them a little extra love in that bump so that they can weather this storm. I think, you know, one of the great fears in the nonprofit community, and we've been connecting with our nonprofit partners throughout the borough and the city, but and it is a fear, is which and how many nonprofits are not going to survive this, and what is going to be the impact on the community members who rely on their services. And so that's something that that's another call to action for us as a philanthropic partner. We understand that as where we are being called to step up and make sure we're showing up in a really robust way for the nonprofit community in Brooklyn. So that bump is an example of that as well.
I just want to say something too, that I actually just saw a question go by this screen, and we will do questions later, but it did occur to me also listening to Marcella speak that a lot of these, so for example, last week, one of the grantees was Equality for Flatbush. This is a small community-based organization serving Flatbush and East Flatbush. I should mention that East Flatbush is one of the poorest census tracts in all of New York City. It is run by residents of Flatbush, which is very reflective of the way we give grants, right? These are organizations that are being run by community members. And they have created a cash fund for low-wage workers, so dollar van drivers, home health aides, street vendors. And I think some of our concerns as a community foundation for Brooklyn is that I am sure you've all read about the millions, tens of millions that have been raised across the river. And we are delighted for New York City that there is this robust and really successful fundraising happening. But certainly my fear as president of the foundation here is that I'm not sure that money is ever going to make it to a community-based organization in East Flatbush. And so we feel a tremendous sense of responsibility for these communities and for these communities that we value and that we value anyway in our grant making on an annual basis, that we may be the only lifeline to these organizations that are deeply embedded and deeply trusted in their communities. So I did have someone ask me a question on a different call about, you know, is there going to be duplication between the millions being raised in Manhattan and here? And, you know, I'm here to say I don't think so. I think you're seeing different kinds of access to support. I think those millions are critically important. But we feel a real responsibility for these profoundly trusted communities-based organizations that are literally lifelines to people living in those neighborhoods.
All right. Hi, guys. This is Jenny. I'm jumping back in for the Q&A portion. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. It's amazing. Our first question we have is, love the simple application. How are you spreading the word to community about the opportunity? Are you reaching out proactively to organizations you think need your support?
Yes.
Great question, Marcella. Go.
Yeah. So myself, our two program officers, Amy and Sabrina, our comms team, Jamila and Leanne, our donor team, Damaris and Jenny and Cecilia and Sarah, like everybody, it's been all hands on deck. We have reached directly out to, and this started in the engagement phase and just kind of putting our ear to the ground to understand what the needs were. We did that outreach to learn, but we also have done outreach to all of our current and many of our recent grantees to say, hey, the fund has launched. This is what we are funding. this is how you apply. Even before they click, they know that it's a short application, because even taking the step to click on the email and go to the website, you know, sometimes that's an extra step that they are like, okay, I'm gonna do tomorrow. We have done media interviews. I've done webinars with Nonprofit New York, with Philanthropy New York, with a number of philanthropic partners. I did an interview with a college campus newspaper, because like, who knows who reads that? But we are throwing the net really, really wide. We're calling organizations who we see maybe not, may not have responded to the email or have opened the email, because we really want them to know, like, this isn't just an update, this is an offer. And we want to make it as easy as possible for you to access these funds and access the support. And I'll just add briefly, so I talked about the capacity building and advocacy as the two other types of approaches we're taking with the fund. The capacity building is going to roll out in the next phase of the fund, and we're looking at providing organizations with support around recession planning and recession proofing, financial modeling, infrastructure shifting and programming shifting, so that they can really maintain and be sustainable throughout this period, and then come out in a position to thrive on the other end. So we understand the need. We've heard that need from our nonprofit leaders, and so we're responding to that. And then in terms of advocacy, our focus is on city, state, and federal government, and making sure that nonprofits are getting the relief and getting the support and the flexibility and the resources they need from those different levels of government, just as big businesses are, just as we're pushing for small businesses to get. We know that nonprofits need that same support, and they're just, if not more, vulnerable.
Great, thank you so much. We have a few questions on a similar vein, which is, and I'm going to make this a two-parter. What are the makeup of the organizations who've applied? Are they people who have received grants from Brooklyn Community Foundation in the past? Are they brand new? And then second, what would the reporting requirements look like for these nonprofits?
Great questions. So we have received 59 applications so far. 32 have been current or former grantees, and 26 have been organizations we don't have a relationship with yet. So that tells us that we've been doing a good job at outreach, because it's kind of almost an even split of responses. In terms of reporting, just as for the application, we're asking for information we need to know right now. We, of course, we're an organization, we're a foundation. We like to be able to tell a story of what our impact looks like on an annual basis. We want to understand where our resources are flowing. We have time to get that information. That is not information we need at this moment. So when we look at engagement with nonprofits, reporting can be a very big burden. We try to streamline our reporting, but we're pushing that back several months, probably towards the end of this year. We'll go back to these organizations and ask them to report how they use the funding. Remember, this is general operating support to support their COVID-19 response. So yeah, we're delaying that, just as we're doing with our current grantees.
I just wanted to pop in a little bit here about reporting, because I think it's a kind of a critical point to make, which is we actually, Brooklyn Community Foundation, because we work so closely with our partners, we actually asked our grantees a couple of years ago, you tell us what's the most useful for you in terms of reporting. Many of us have run nonprofits previously to being at the foundation, and we all know that much reporting is pretty useless and probably gets filed away, and yet of course it's hugely burdensome on a nonprofit, hardworking nonprofit. So we actually asked our grantees, and continue to ask, what's useful for reporting. And as Marcella mentioned, we're interested in information. So we want to know about a story and a success story, and also, you know, what are some of their challenges, what are some of their barriers, how could we help them in other ways. But I guess our working assumption, and I think Marcella's, mentioned this, is if you were good enough for us to give you a grant, we believe you. You don't have to tell us again how great you are. And I think that I think that's kind of an ethos that is a thread through all of our work and continues through the COVID-19 fund.
Yeah. And I'll just add one other thing about reporting, because it's so critical. We see reporting as an opportunity to kind of refine and improve how we support nonprofits. So we really want to know, what goals do you have around whatever we're funding? What are you working towards, and how are you doing as you kind of go down that journey? And what we try to identify is, what are some capacity building or network building kind of resources we can offer to help them along the way, in addition to the funding. So the reporting is really about refining the relationship and being able to cultivate a broader set of resources we can offer.
Great, thank you guys. Over what time period and in what increments will you give out the money raised?
Well, we've begun giving it out. So now and continuing, we know that the impact of this is going to have a very, the impact is going to be very long and deep. We also know that what we know today may not be true in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 months, 3 months. So we're trying to maintain a level of nimbleness so that we can adapt to how things change and we can respond to needs as they emerge. We've started giving out funds. We will continue to give out funds, just as we're going to continue to raise funds. We're starting with the immediate response grants, which are $10,000. In our next phase, we're really going to look at how do we respond to needs that have emerged as like sustained need areas, and those grants will be a bit larger. Grantees of the immediate response grants aren't going to be restricted from applying to for those funds. They can also come back because they've been responding in these immediate ways, and they probably will be really well positioned to respond in a sustained way. But we're going to continue to roll it out like that, with the addition of the capacity building support.
It's a great question, and I completely agree with everything Marcella said. It's tricky. I just want to be clear, as president of the foundation, the first thing I want to say actually is that the part of the launch of the fund, even before the fund launched, this was a board, this was really a community decision. This was the board and the entire staff, and the board right away, and I'm actually talking at the end of February, said we need to get in front of this. Brooklyn is going to end up the most vulnerable, and we're going to commit to this. So I do want to say that everything you've heard today really comes from a very, very strong commitment and skin in the game from our board, as well as I mentioned, donors. But it's tricky because we don't know how much we're going to be able to raise. We are truly working every single day trying to raise as much money as possible. And so there's a funny dance here where Marcella and team need to be as prudent and careful, while also responsive and generous. And so, it really is, it's going to just continue to be a team effort. And it's hard with any accuracy to say, we've raised 800,000 today. I'd love to raise 8 million, because I think that sustained response that she talked about is absolutely critical, because in a year from now, we are still going to be talking about a food pantry in Bed-Stuy that has to rebuild its efforts, right? It's not like the needs in Bed-Stuy went away, right? They served 3 million people last year, and they still are going to need to do that. So for us as a community foundation, we need to kind of keep our eye on this. And so it's a funny thing, and there are no absolute numbers here. We're just trying to be, I guess, both realistic and optimistic.
Thank you.
And grateful.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We are, in fact, a few minutes over the time that we have allotted for this webinar. If we didn't get to your question, we really apologize. We may have another session in a week or so, but if you're really curious about something in particular, feel free to email me. This is Jenny Walsky, and I'll respond to you as soon as I can. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Marcella and Cecilia, is there anything else you'd like to add before we close out?
I, of course, would. If you are on Instagram, please, please start following us, and please send other people our feed. We are featuring on the ground stories about what these extraordinary nonprofits are doing, and they are phenomenal. The stories are incredibly poignant, but it will really give people a very concrete sense of what it is that a community foundation does for its borough and what our amazing neighbors are doing every day to try to combat this crisis. So any kind of social media, please join, please tell other people. And obviously, if you can support us or tell other people to support us, we'd be really grateful. And thank you so much.
Yeah, and I'll just say thank you to everyone for their support, and wishing you and your loved ones well.
Thank you, everyone.